I've got two legends in the camera world here today, Jordan and Chris. Welcome back to the show. I haven't had you together for a long time, but great to see your faces.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
Have we ever been together? This is exciting.
I don't know if we have.
Oh,
yeah.
Wait. Have you not been together? Oh, maybe that's possible. Yeah. And Chris has been on less, but you're on like super early. That was the first biggest episode was Chris's one, which was about like how to pick a camera, which is a big question that maybe I should deal with more often than I do.
Well, then we can loosely apply legend, I guess.
Well,
loosely.
Yes. We'll circle around to camera choices later. But if their names or faces aren't familiar enough, if you happen to be watching video, Chris and Jordan come from, well, first the Camera Store TV. Now for the past, 5 years? Is that about right? They've been doing DP
pretty much.
Review
We
TV.
almost hit 5 years with DPReview.
Almost. And now you can be found at Petapixel. So there's a few things I want to talk about here. Obviously, it's a big moment for your guys' career, so I want to find out a little bit about what you have been doing, what you will be doing. But first and foremost, I just want to, take a moment to pour one out for DP Review, and maybe I'll also air some of my grievances. I don't know if you can air yours, but about losing what I really think is one of the best websites on the internet. Like, it's not just about the camera community to me. Losing DP Review it's representative of what the internet can be. It's sort of like the best of the internet. You've got an active, real human community of users that love reading the site. You've got very well-educated and thoughtful writers reviewing cameras, and very high-quality samples, like databases of information that you can't find them anywhere else. And it took 25 years to put all this together. And I'm sad it's gone. So I don't know, maybe Jordan, if you could start by telling me, what are the feelings you got losing DP Review?
I mean, that website means so much to me. Like, I would not be, making a photography show if I hadn't been able to, very quickly absorb a whole lot of information. When I first got started in the photo biz, like I started at a camera store, I didn't know anything. So I just lived on DP Review. So it's huge for me. And it's still, when I wake up out of habit, I just, like throw open Twitter and Instagram and DP Review and see what's up this morning. Like that is kind of one of my daily sites that I always drop into, just to see, if there's anything exciting going on, even though, now that I work for them, I have an idea when articles are coming up, but see what's exciting on the forums, all that kind of stuff. It's, been a part of my life, that website, for the longest time, well before I ever started working there.
This is a big part of what I mean of like why this is a unique thing to lose. How many websites do we go to each day? So much of the content that we create has been sort of siphoned off onto platforms because they can give us the audience, right? The promise of Instagram is that you can get more followers. On TikTok, you can blow up. Twitter will, get you the retweets and the engagement, and all these things have like tickled us all so much to lure us away from writing our own blogs or building our own websites. There's a lot less people that are doing it these days because it's more challenging. It's harder to build a business on it as well. So DP Review was one of the few URLs I would type into my browser and go to the website. There's like them and The Verge. That's almost been it for a few years now. I go to the website to find out what's going on. And in the time of, I feel like I'm tying every conversation back to AI right now. But right now we're about to have a lot of computer written content flooding the internet. We need human written content more than ever, and we're about to lose a nice chunk of it. So I don't know. Chris, What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think first off, a lot of people are talking about DP Review in a nostalgic sense, right? When we first made the change, we heard this stuff, this news coming out. I think that's what everybody was responding to. And rightfully so. A lot of people were hurt. They were kind of lost. They're like, what am I going to do next? But also, as you just said, the big thing for me with DP Review has been the people that work there. You know about the website, but when you start actually working with the team, you realize like this is a collection of incredibly talented people. We have people who are scientists. We have people who are, doing work, as we say, like, comparing cameras, and they know their stuff. We have people that are getting into the smartphone industry early and starting to talk about those. And so it was such a talented group of people. I think that is what's made it so special. And talented photographers and people just working so hard every day to make that such a powerful resource. So, That's a huge loss, I think. But as you say, that's also made it so great. It was a bunch of humans doing heartfelt, passionate work.
Yeah, and historically too, like you said, Tyler, no one else has a database like that studio scene. You know, like other websites like Imaging Resource have done some comparison tools and stuff, but nothing that goes back that far. You know, when people are looking at the early days of digital photography, which historians are going to do at some point, this is going to be the best resource for that. And a lot of the tools aren't going to work if it's just, you know, backed up on the Wayback Machine or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, I know you guys still have a few more days there, so I'll do the bad mouthing for you and just
please
just say like, I think this is wrong. Like this is a bad thing to do. I can fully understand, how Amazon, who I think a lot of people only realize that Amazon, had been owning DPReview for a while now. A lot of people didn't even know that, but I can see how it's not in their interest to run what is really a niche website. You know, it's not, cameras aren't the biggest market in the world. It's not $1 billion industry. Well, I don't know if it's $1 billion. I don't know how big of an industry it is, but it's, you know, it's not a place that they're not going to massively explode. Like DPReview's size is the best you could hope for. It's going to be a steady, stable business that seems like it could run indefinitely. I don't know. But whatever the case, it doesn't deserve to disappear. And Amazon runs the biggest web hosting company on the planet. Most websites are hosted on AWS. First of all, there's no reason they couldn't just keep alive what is already there, or really let somebody take over. I'm sure even if it was community run, even if it gradually fell apart because it couldn't be maintained, but that there was some opportunity for someone to keep this moving forward. It's so wasteful. And I still want to like clarify what I was touching on earlier with the whole AI issue. So if anybody hasn't seen, CNET, huge blog, another like one of the few, or not blog, I mean publication, internet publication, one of the few other like destination websites people go to, CNET, has been writing a lot more using AI. So just like generative text without a human behind it. And they have also laid off a lot of writers lately. They've been shrinking their staff. And this is partly because it has become really easy to create text using a computer. All of that text is using human sources. If I ask ChatGPT, like, tell me, you know, what is the best point and shoot camera in 2023, its source is going to be DPReview that was, you know, written by humans. If those humans go away, where is it going to be gathering that info? It's going to be like gathering it from other link farm garbage websites that are just cashing in on like these little micro transactions, like punch the monkey ads, and are basically spam sites that are probably being written by ChatGPT, just using the info off of the back of the camera box. I mean, we're going to lose the high quality information that would be the source of any of these new writing technologies. So, I mean, it's just, if this continues to happen with all expert websites, it will be so damaging to the whole internet. So this shouldn't happen. I don't know. That was my big rant. You guys, am I right?
No, you're absolutely right. Like, and especially for all those people at DPReview, you know, a lot of them don't know where they're going after this. So, you know, this is my call out to everybody. You know, if you need skilled technical writers, like, these are the best. And, you know, this is our one last stand against ChatGPT.
Well, I just, you know, DPReview, like, we're lowly contractors, right? So we're only privy to so much information. But from what I understand, you know, I think there's an assumption in the photo market that like, oh, photography's dead. This is a victim of, you know, a failed business. But actually DPReview is doing, as far as I understand, quite well, you know, and modernizing. We had a whole bunch of like young people. I mean, just the fact they brought Jordan and I on, that's, I mean, so incredible, right?
Incredible youth. Yes. So much youth.
Right? But, you know, we're old, but they were bringing on like young people and like, you know, fresh perspectives, really interesting writers, you know, doing TikTok stuff, changing the way that they share their content. So they were really doing a really good job of modernizing. I don't think there was anything about it that was stagnant. It was really fresh. It was really doing well. So that, like you say, Tyler, is a big loss, because that's exactly what we need, is just new, fresh writing and new ideas, and many different kinds of markets, having YouTube, having TikTok, having the articles, and DPReview is that. So I just think they were doing a great job making a resource that many people could enjoy, not just our generation of people.
Part of the challenge too is that it probably ended up in that situation because it was so successful, because DPReview was so well run and such high quality content. That's why it was acquired. Like Amazon was interested in it because they knew it was good, because it was doing something special. There are many photography, like I say, blogs out there that are more casually run, a little less systematic about how they do things. And this was really an exception. So that's why it was acquired. And that's also why we're losing it. I mean, it just all feels crazy, and it's at a moment that it also makes it feel like an omen of like, is this the future we have with internet content? I sure hope not.
I'm very curious to know how much Amazon expected with the backlash on this, like, people being so hurt and feeling lost. I'm curious.
There's not going to be enough backlash. I mean, something I just floated on Twitter, but I know will not go anywhere, is like, I wish that the photo community would rally around, like, okay, well, we're not going to post affiliate links to cameras until you do something with DPReview. We're going to be using B&H affiliates, but the thing is, that's a big sacrifice for individual people to make. I don't have a ton of Amazon affiliate income, so it actually wouldn't be a big sacrifice for me, but I've already kind of done it. So I don't know. We're going to lose something, and there won't be a big revolt to keep it. And that's sad to me. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of holding my breath because the big outcry has been over losing the information. Mm-hmm. I hope it just makes Amazon, take a breath and reevaluate archiving. I mean, I don't know if everyone's going to keep their job. I'm very skeptical of that. I mean, we're certainly moving on, but just find somebody to maintain the database, I think, would be great.
I do think it is even worse, because even if the database stays up, which is good for historical reasons, keeping some minimal infrastructure of how the tests are done so that you can continue on using the same standards that they have in the past, like that test chart continues to be set up in some warehouse somewhere so that somebody can put the new lenses and cameras on and keep pressing the shutter button and keep uploading to it. Nobody's going to be able to rebuild that archive of tests, right? So even if somebody is able to restart, well, I mean, people do, there are other test websites that are building their own archives. On the video side, I'm glad to see that CineD is, starting to build a similar archive of tests for video cameras, but nobody's going to be able to go back and historically bring that together with the past tests. So I don't know. It's sad, but I don't want to spend all episode on it. Maybe you guys can tell me a little bit more about what you're going to be shifting into in the future. Petapixel has been lucky enough to pick you guys up. Tell me about that move.
It's been great so far. I mean, of course, we've known the people behind it for a long time. We've known the chief editor for, a decade, Jordan? I mean, a long time. So, and that's why we start DPReview, is really just the friendships that you develop when you meet these people, and, the camaraderie and understanding that you guys have similar ideas. But Petapixel has been so good in that moving forward, they're giving us a lot of freedom. They're giving us a lot of leeway. They're letting us, take risks. So I think that's great. And also their push is a bit maybe more other tech as well as photography. And I think that's always a good move in today's world. So yeah, I find that aspect very exciting.
Yeah, I think it's always just, a fresh start makes you reevaluate some things like the structure of the episodes and that. And, I can't say too much at this point because there's, embargoed things and stuff like that. But we do have some episodes that are taking on a pretty new format, certainly are going to feel a little bigger than what we did at DPReview in some cases. So I'm looking forward to doing that. But the main thing is, like, we wanted to keep making our show. We weren't looking to, like, dramatically alter the DNA of everything. It's still going to be, Chris having very strong opinions and being snarky, and me pushing back against the snark. And that's been our dynamic for a decade.
More importantly, it is still going to be lots of Alberta in the springtime, where all the trees are dead and everything's brown and the grass is yellow. So I want everybody to know that's safe. Everything else we're losing,
brown and white
that
colors.
is safe.
That's our version of a studio test scene, is like, how does brown, gray Alberta look compared to 12 years ago?
You're still going to see
still bad?
Park.
Okay.
You're still going to see downtown, you're still going to see all that stuff. That's all staying. Don't worry.
I mean, I guess the funny thing, I just should remind people, we're doing this recording remotely, but we're all in the same city, which is very rare. Like, we're the surprising little community of, photo tech YouTubers that are all in Calgary, because there's not that many here. So I don't know if anybody didn't know that. Our history, like me and you guys, go back to the beginning of both of our channels, almost to the first Fuji X100. I think was my first cameo on your guys' channel, and
and that was one of our first maybe like 12 videos or something like that. That was early, and it is bad, and I don't recommend finding.
It was
that video.
cold too. That was cold.
It was painful. Yeah,
that was horribly cold that day.
Yeah, painful to make and painful to watch. But
that's our secret.
Where we are now.
Yeah. But no, it's great that your guys' show is gonna, continue. I think anybody that their primary format of DP review might have been through you guys is probably in the best position right now, because things will change a lot less than obviously if they're mostly reading reviews, which I did both. So it's going to sting for me, but definitely glad you guys are going to be carrying on.
Well, and we're going to be writing some of the reviews for Petapixel as well. So there will still be some written stuff for that. And we will bring all that we have learned from the DP review staff over there.
We haven't been replaced by AI bots yet, but if there's a way to make my hair look more black or something, that'd be awesome. Like, I'd totally go for an AI filter, but heart's still beating in here for a little bit longer.
Well, okay. I'm very glad to hear all that. We also have a new camera to talk about. I got hands-on with it, and it turned out to be a lot more exciting than I actually expected, because I didn't know what was going to be announced. And I had a rough sense that it was going to be in the, kind of consumer camera line. So I'm like, entry level, whatever. I think this turned out to be a lot bigger than I expected. So Sony announced the ZV-E1. You guys have had hands-on time with it. I don't know. Chris, how do you describe it?
The camera sucks, right? Because, no. It's, if you look at it from a photographic standpoint, and that's always how we've done our show, right? Is I'm looking at it from photo side, Jordan's looking at it from video side. There's not much to love, obviously a lower resolution sensor compared to what's contemporary, no EVF, it does have excellent autofocus though, absolutely. And I like the handling. It was fine, but you're back to the two dials that can only be controlled by one finger, which is effectively, to me, one dial when it really comes down to it. So in that regard, I can't love it. But, at the same time, and I think we're going to probably talk about this, what do creators really need nowadays as far as image quality goes? If you are putting things on Instagram, and if you are putting things on, Snapchat and stuff like that, like TikTok, what do you really need as far as image quality goes? iPhone. Yeah. Right. So in that regard, I think it does make a lot of sense given what the camera's mandate is. But as a photographic tool, it sucks.
Yeah, it's not for you because you have me. That's the
Jordan,
thing,
tell
Chris.
him why he's wrong.
Yeah. But is it even for Jordan? This is an interesting conversation. I think it's for Tyler. Is it for Jordan? I want to hear.
I mean, in some ways, yeah. Like, it is really cool to get that sensor at a very low cost. An A7S III was what, $3,800 US. An FX3 was more than that, I believe. So you get a very fast scanning sensor, and that's been our big, the theme where we're seeing all these budget vlogging cameras come out after the last few years has been like, the rolling shutter's so bad you can't walk with this camera. So it kind of, sucks in that regard. They have fixed it with this. It's a very fast reading sensor. You get full width 4K 60. The baffling thing to me is like it has a lot of really cool features, like new stabilization mode where it'll maintain your composition while stabilizing. That live punch in, so you can get like multiple recording frames while you're shooting. But all of those are relying on cropping a sensor that's barely 4K to start with. That's why I'm kind of confused with this camera a little bit. It's a 12 megapixel sensor. By the time you're shooting 16:9, it's 8.4 megapixels. We crop it anymore, we're below 4K and we're upsampling everything. And you could say that theoretically, but when I was editing the ZV-E1 video, every time we had, the high-end stabilization or the the compensation adjustment where it's reframing for you, it looks noticeably worse. And it's pretty cool what Sony's done where it's very smoothly, it's almost applying a curve to the sharpening, but it is still super over-sharpened video once you start going into any of those crop modes. I mean, you saw the footage too, Tyler. What did you think?
Well, I'm probably more positive than either of you, it sounds like. So maybe Chris, you're right, this is the one for me. This is really a camera that can be for two like very different people. Sony's idea of what this is primarily entry level, right? Like this is your first amazing camera. This is your first full frame maybe. And you want to be able to shoot no compromise image quality for a very reasonable price with something that can easily fit inside your bag. And maybe you don't understand all of the more technical details about what an A7S III or an FX3 can do for you. So it's going to handle some of that for you, offer more automation, offer more AI assistance. And I think in those situations, you're right, Jordan, about the image quality being somewhat degraded, but it doesn't matter that much to me because I think anybody using those, they've already made some compromises. They're probably not shooting in S-Log. They're probably shooting without an ND filter. Like they're not at peak image quality. They're at the type of image quality that actually doesn't matter for a lot of YouTubers, like a lot of content creators that are, in the genre of either how a TikTok story is told or the way that Mr. Beast would record a video. That like precision image quality is not what's most important to them. And I do think all these AI tools are going to do a great job for that kind of use case. The one you mentioned of where so if anybody hasn't heard, one thing it can do is identify your face and track you through the scene, which we've seen that on like lower end, like live stream cameras before, or, even webcams that Apple's been making, like it's in iPads and the studio display. It'll, as you move around through the frame, it'll track you. And I have not found that useful on any of those. I don't think it's going to be very useful on the Sony. I think it's a bit of a gimmick. But that stronger stabilization, I do think is useful. Even if the image isn't quite as good, it's definitely good enough for 90% of use cases. And the stabilization does really work. By cropping in so much, it's able to get rid of any of the wobble in the corners. So I'd recommend getting an extremely wide lens for this. So you have that, you're predicting like, okay, this will crop, so I'm ready for it. And then the other person who camera is for is someone like me that I would think about this as being an amazing backup camera, is an amazing second camera in my bag. So, right now I'm not using Sony as my primary, but if I had, let's say, an FX3 and I'm shooting a wedding, I'm shooting a travel video, I'm shooting corporate video, whatever, I've got that fully kitted out FX3 with like a big 24-70 and everything's big and chunky around it. I need another camera in my bag. And I want it to be able to shoot in a matching image that looks the same, that can function in all the same ways. And it's that camera is tiny. And the only real compromise you'd have in a professional situation, other than some like physical dials are smaller and stuff, is it is much more likely to overheat because there's no big fan inside. So I can absolutely see this being like an amazing thing to just throw in your bag because it's half the size, or not quite, but almost half the size of some of these other cameras, but can still shoot the 10-bit S-Log 3, 4K with 4K 60, 4K 120 is through a firmware update, I believe. It packs it all in, and it seems like the only real compromise is overheating, which is because of the size. So that's a physical choice. It's not because they made a cheap camera. It's because they decided to make it smaller. So I don't know. That's my take on it.
I think Sony is incredibly smart actually making this camera. And it's interesting too. I think we've seen now for a couple other cameras before this that they're kind of experimenting with this idea of using cropping, not just for stabilization, but to correct breathing, for example, in lenses, right? And now creative compositions and tracking and making it easy for somebody who's by themselves. If they don't have a Jordan, what are they going to do, right? If you don't have a Jordan, what are you going to do? So I really like that. I think it's very intelligent. And yeah, the downside is you lose image quality, but I feel like we're getting into an era where people aren't as concerned about image quality, or depending on what you're doing, when the story that you're trying to tell is more important.
I would love to know how many people are watching YouTube in 4K right now, because I bet that number's gotten a lot smaller since they started doing those, like defaulting to the smaller resolutions. You really have to click the button on every video and tell it like, no, I want to see this 4K, 4K. You have to remind it over and over. And I think not many people are as persistent about that as I am. So I think a lot more people are also already watching in lower resolutions.
I think we see it from a different perspective because we're talking about image quality. So when we see our stats, it's like, oh yeah, a lot of people are still watching it on a computer or a TV, but that's solely because of the topic that we're covering. You know, if we were doing travel logs, I bet that number would be a third or a quarter of what it is.
What are you actually shooting on right now as your main YouTube camera?
I'm primarily using the Panasonic S5 II, which I know you've shot with a lot. And yeah, as I get to use it more and more, I'm really loving that camera. I still want it in a more professional body. I find it really easy to accidentally bump dials and stuff like that, compared to an S1H or a GH6. But I mean, just the combination of the video quality and the autofocus that's now usable in a pinch, I think it's really a killer camera. I am curious, actually, I wanted to know, Tyler, is this the first time you've used a Sony camera with S-Cinetone?
It is. That's actually what I shot everything with. I didn't flip into S-Log3 during this trip, so I've seen S-Log3 a lot more. This was my first S-Cinetone, and I didn't like it. Not at all. Right now I'm sitting in a studio with a light in front of me and a light behind me and everything's very controlled. And in this situation, I'm sure it looks great. Like in studio, controlled, sure. Outside, any non-log profile, the highlights clip too soon for my taste. Like it's just much too aggressive in like what it's willing to throw away in terms of dynamic range. The only camera that I think is getting this right to me is Fuji, that seems to be doing this like live dynamic range recovery thing. It's like, oh, those are hot highlights. I will bring them down as I record and give you a bit of a tone mapped image in camera. I don't really see anybody else doing that, and that's the new minimum for me. It looks broken when those highlights disappear to my eye. And, especially because I did a little Instagram reel showing off the camera, recording myself using the ZV-E1. And when I looked at the footage afterwards, I was looking at it next to when I shot myself the phone, and I'm like, well, everything is clipped. The sky is blue on my phone. The sky is white on the Sony. It is a compromised image. It looks worse on the Sony because I'm shooting in that baked in profile. I can't recover the highlights. The thing that makes these larger sensor cameras look better than phones is that there's sort of a softness to the tone roll off. There's less, the way that highlights come back down is less fake and artificial looking than a tone mapped iPhone image, and it has less additional sharpening. So if I'm not getting those benefits, I might as well use my phone. So I still much prefer the S-Log3, and I'd love to see everybody take an approach that's closer to Fuji's. I mean, I've said this in a few different places, but it's insane to me that all of these camera companies have not hired the colorists that are making like the LUTs and the power grades that YouTubers are using and sharing and talking about, that like they're selling power grades and LUTs for like $50 to $100 each that look amazing. It's like, no, now my Sony footage, now this S-Log3 does kind of look like film. It looks very nice. It is mapped into all the right places. We've compressed this wide range of S-Log3 into a more usable Rec 709, and it looks kind of filmic. But you have to go seek this out on your own afterwards. If you buy any of these very expensive cameras, none of it can be baked into your image as you're shooting, except on Fuji. And even in that case, it's, I think they could do a little bit better with what some of those colors are. It's strange to me that nobody has like brought this to get this experience that it was like when we would shoot film, where it's like, look, I don't know anything about color grading. I just want it to look nice. Can my camera just output it to be pretty? I don't know. I ranted for that a long time. What do you think about Cinetone?
The reason I asked you specifically about the Cinetone profile is because we've been burned on that profile so many times, because it is retaining some information in the highlight, but not all the color information. So, we're so often when we're shooting with S-Log2, like let's expose it nice and bright without clipping the highlights. If you do that with Cinetone, you'll wash everyone's face out and it'll look atrocious. So that's why I was curious about asking that, because I do like S-Cinetone in controlled lighting now that I know how to work for it. But even with the camera and its auto exposure modes, you know, which are designed to help people get used to filmmaking for the first time, like that new cinema mode where it switches it to S-Cinetone at 24 frames per second auto exposure. Once it jumps over there, then it's defaulting to totally clipping those highlights. You know, if you've got lighter skin, you're going to have a terrible looking image. So I totally agree with you. And I do think for a straight out of camera non-log profile, Fujifilm Eterna is still the best thing out there at this point. But yeah, there needs to be more work done on it.
Well, and to me, it's actually, Eterna is the appropriate comparison. I mean, it's trying to do the similar thing to S-Cinetone, but it's not the one that I loved them. I mean, the little rant I just had was more referring to like the actual film emulation, like the stronger film emulations where it's like putting a look in there. I didn't love Eterna as much either. I basically just like did my quick test with it, and I'm like, well, all these other ones look nicer, and if I'm going to shoot Eterna, I need to grade it anyway, so why wouldn't I use F-Log? And especially now that we've got F-Log 2, which is amazing, right? Like F-Log 1 was like fine. It's kind of like Canon log. It's like, okay, it's log-ish, but F-Log 2 is great. You know, like you can really push that as far as you want. So, yeah, now that I've got that, it's just like, if I need to add a LUT on top in the end, I might as well go all the way from F-Log 2.
Yeah, I go F-Log to do a conversion to Eterna, and then I find it very easy to grade and get like a lovely image. But
it seems like that still recovers more highlights.
Absolutely, than just shooting Eterna. Okay, so Tyler, then this brings me with the ZV-E1 to another thing I want to discuss with you, because I am constantly informed that I'm in the minority here. Electronic viewfinders for shooting video. Where do you sit?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I definitely really did miss that. I actually kept just putting the camera up to my face, which does nothing. You just can't see anything because there's nothing to look into. And that wasn't great. So, you know, I would miss that. If it was my primary camera, I would definitely miss having an electronic EVF. So they've kind of become necessary for me, especially just shooting outside. None of the LCDs are really bright enough to like really tell what you're shooting. So I do find that I need to, you know, keep checking inside of a little eyepiece to know what's up. It doesn't need to be super high quality to me. What was the older Sony that had the pop-up EVF that?
The RX100 series.
Yes. I love that. Like I would take a little compromise EVF, like, you know, find a way to cram it in there. That'd be really nice. I understand that this is a different kind of camera. You know, they're trying to save money everywhere they can. And so that makes sense, right? Like I get that they cut it, but for a camera I'm going to choose to use all the time, I would still like it to be there. But it actually doesn't need to be like the highest image quality to me. In terms of when I'm shooting video, it's like, for me, it's more about like checking when I'm in a bright environment. I'm going to look into it briefly, but most of the time I'll actually be using the screen on the back. So
yeah, I found it really weird that it has their new active shoe with support for like 4-channel XLR audio and stuff. And they used to have a clip-on electronic viewfinder for some of their old like NEX series cameras. I would love to see that make a comeback. Same thing going on with Canon and Fujifilm. All of them are now releasing these more powerful shoes that can provide phantom power and send in, you know, multiple audio inputs, things like that. And they're not using them for an electronic viewfinder. It just seems like madness to me. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I just, there's something handy, but also sometimes frustrating with that shoe dependent interface. And I've been running into it with the S5 II using that XLR adapter. So I really liked the new Condor Blue Cage. You know, I did a video of like rigging up the S5 II with that. But once it's on, I can't use the XLR adapter. So then there's no convenient way to send other mics into the camera because it relies on that. It needs to go into the hot shoe. There's no other way for it to communicate. I can't put it in a cold shoe and run some cables or anything like that, because it takes power through it as well.
Yeah.
So that really kind of like limits what you can do compared to if it was just a more, you know, a dumb shoe.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I'd love to see. I'm surprised no one is doing like hot shoe extensions for those, because that's something we used to see in older, camcorders and stuff all the time, was a little cable so you could or even, your off-camera shoe cords for photographers. I'm really surprised they haven't done a first-party version of that.
Exactly. I think it's possible, but I just haven't wanted to go to the trouble of trying to make it work. I think it'd be a hard time finding the right cable and stuff. So it's not what I'm using, but yeah, I don't know. Any other last thoughts on the ZV-E1? Do you?
So it's not for me, but I think it's going to be incredibly popular, right? And that's something that I really struggle with when we're doing our review, is all of these features I'm rattling off. I'm like, there's, that weird 2:3:5 aspect ratio that's actually 16:9 video. I'm like, that's madness. But for most people who grab this, they're going to be like, ooh, I like the black bars. That's cool. It's not for me. And yeah, I think it's going to be probably more popular than the ZV-E10, their APS-C version. I think it's a more successful camera than that. So I think it's going to do extremely well, which will further prove that I'm a little bit out of touch. But when I'm reviewing a product, I just want to make sure everyone is aware of all the compromises as much as possible before they pick something up. And a lot of the compromises aren't going to matter for the core demographic for this, but I still feel like it's important, especially for people like you mentioned who might be grabbing this as a secondary backup camera, to understand what those compromises might be.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I also just want to touch on, emphasize one more time how good of a job I think Sony's doing with this AI stuff, and that this is what will keep their lead. Because as Panasonic started making their announcements, I was like, oh, Panasonic's coming up pretty hot. The price of the S5 II compared to what you'd get in a Sony, I'm like, I don't know, that's pretty appealing. How is Sony going to maintain their, because again, talking about video cameras, it's between Sony and Panasonic to me right now. Canon only is in the cinema cameras. Their more compact ones just don't even compete right now. So yeah, to me it was like, okay, FX3 versus S5 II, and you get so much more for the money. But the AI stuff can really keep Sony ahead, especially the autofocus tools where it can detect, okay, this is the person I'm filming, so only autofocus on them as an individual. Obviously, Panasonic's not anywhere near that. They're not adding an AI chip into the next camera that's announced. And that will, continue. That could become a thing where if you get used to that functionality on a Sony and you're like, oh, it works way better. It worked better before. Now it works another generational leap. It'll keep a bit of that gap between Sony and Panasonic that was there in the last generation as well. The difference will be this time Panasonics are usable. So
I do want to kind of push back on Sony's use of AI and everything right now, because the camera is not learning. You can say, hey, this person here, I would like to identify them as a primary subject, and it'll do a nice job of following those. But Panasonic had a similar thing back with the GH2, almost 10 years ago. Sony's just drawing from a huge machine learning database in order to make this work. But yeah, the phrase AI kind of drives me crazy, because it's like, if I'm photographing or filming my dog all the time, is it going to get better at photographing or filming my dog? No, it's not. It's just drawing from a big machine learning database, which is great because it means other camera companies can catch up. I mean, when we start seeing actual AI cameras that, are like, oh, Jordan's filming this, so we are going to put this in Vlog. He likes his audio peaking at about minus 12 dB, and gets to actually know the operator in a similar way to what the DJI Ronins are doing right now, where it learns how you walk and move, and the stabilization gets better over time. When we start seeing stuff like that in stills and video cameras, that's going to be incredibly compelling. And I do think Sony has a leg up and the resources to make that work. All
right, let's talk about what I've been thinking of as battle of the brands. A bit of an update of where are we with camera brands right now? I think Sony and Panasonic are the ones to pick at the moment for small video cameras. I still love my Canon for photos. Let's kind of go through just the basic list of which brands exists and what would you choose them for? What are their strong points and what are their weak points right now in 2023? I don't know where to start. So maybe we'll start with Canon because it's what I talk about the most. Where are we with Canon photos right now?
I think Canon's done a great job of improving their autofocus capabilities, right? I mean, Sony's always the gold standard that we've been kind of trying to chase for years now. And so I would say Canon is probably my second favorite as far as autofocusing goes. You know, the eye detect, the intuitiveness of the camera, its wildlife capabilities for animal detect. I think that's probably second best. I do still love the handling of the cameras. I think lens-wise, we could stand to see a few more optical formulas come out, but I do like the body design overall. I like the autofocus. I think they're doing a good job that way. And I always love using my R5. I think you also have one, Tyler?
Yeah, that's right. R5 is still my go-to for work that needs resolution. Like if it's commercial work, if it's going to be printed, or I just need all of the image quality I can. I go to the R5. It's still in that position for me. Like I try to think about, what would I buy if I had nothing right now? The only thing giving the Canon an edge over Sony at the moment is the usability. I actually think like the Sony A7R5 is the better camera. It's probably a little bit better sensor, probably a little bit better autofocus, but physically just operating the dials, getting it to the settings that I want, I still prefer Canon for that. And that's enough reason for me to keep choosing it over Sony, even if like the technical details aren't quite on the same level.
It's interesting to see though that they've really in last year been pushing so many more entry-level models and fleshing out their lineup. And at first, like especially playing with the APS-C cameras, like R7, R10, I was like, I'm going to hate these. They're automatically going to be toys. I'm going to think they're garbage. And actually using them again, it's that usability, the body design, the lightweight. I've had a really good experience using them. I have said publicly that the A7R5 is, in my opinion, my favorite camera that I've used as far as technical performance goes. And like you say, capabilities overall, the sensor capability. But yeah, I still really enjoy using the Canons. I think they're doing a great job making bodies that people actually enjoy shooting photography with.
Yeah, I haven't tried any of the APS-C ones, but I think you're right. Yeah. But okay, Jordan, so where are we with Canon video shooting right now?
I totally agree with you, Tyler, that like their specs are great on paper. I just don't like shooting video with them, and I don't like editing the video that comes out of them, especially C-Log 3 footage. Chris will attest, flying back from a Canon event, I'm just like, all right, now I get to try and get vaguely workable skin tones for a little while here. Like, I understand the argument that like, look, the camera doesn't have enough dynamic range to justify C-Log 2, but the color on C-Log 3 is bad and annoying, and I don't like the noise pattern and the shadows and stuff like that. I don't love working with it. And then it's just the absolute basics that we've been saying for years, like why does my level go away when I'm recording? Why does my histogram go away while I'm rolling? Why when I shoot slow motion does it go back to 1080 60p on every camera when I leave slow motion mode? Like that makes absolutely no sense. So it's basic usability that they're not taking seriously. The sensor performance is good. Like that little R8 is $1,500 and gets you uncropped 4K 60, less money than that ZV-E1 we were just talking about. But I don't like using them, so it's tougher for me to recommend them.
But for photography, they're great.
Yeah, and so obviously, eventually we'll get to what we think are kind of the best hybrids, because I don't think any of us would choose a Canon right now. It's just like the camera that can do everything. I want to make sure though that I still clarify. Like I think the Canon C70 has the best video image quality for under $15,000 basically. Like it punches above its weight. Nothing can touch it still. The only compromise is it's visibly not that sharp, which is sort of weird because it's like everything's 4K and everything should be sharp right now. And it's a native 4K camera. At 4K, it doesn't look as sharp as other cameras. But that is worth it to me because the sensor just gathers so much data. Shooting C-Log 2 on it is incredibly flexible. C70 and the other modern Canon cinema cameras are still my favorites in that price range, but it's all of those more compact ones that I just don't think are up to snuff when it comes to video. Next up, the big contender for top dog is Sony. Obviously, they've been pushing hard. If we had recorded this 10 years ago, we just wouldn't have brought Sony up. Like nobody I knew shot Sony for a long time. So their comeback has been incredible. And I think they deserve I think they're second place in terms of sales. Like they absolutely deserve the growth that they've had. So I guess let's start with photography again. What do we think of Sony right now?
I love that they're revamping their line of lenses, and I think they've done a great job with that. We've just recently seen them change their 2.8 zooms, and in a very positive way, so that was great. What's not to love about the cameras? Other than they're kind of soulless, they're not really sexy, but they work, right? They focus beautifully. I still don't think anybody can touch them. Companies are coming close to mimicking their photo capabilities, their focus capabilities, but nobody has a handle still on just the sort of fire and forget capability of their autofocus, where you just shoot and it just works, and it seems to anticipate you even in its default modes. There's not a lot of tinkering that has to be done. I think that's a really good gateway for people that are trying to get into photography. It takes a lot of the fear out. Handling wise, with the new menus, the body designs, I don't really complain about the handling like a lot of people used to. I think a lot of people still. Are you guys agreeing or not?
No, I'm just looking at your tiny hands that justifies that. Yeah.
I find photographically, I find the handling is fine now. I don't really hate it. And maybe that's because we're using new cameras every week. So you kind of just get used to always having a new product in your hand. So I think the sensors, again, fantastic image quality. I don't mind the color. They have beautiful black and white mode that people don't appreciate. So really, yeah, for whatever reason, when I picked up the A7R5 and I shot it, it just seemed to check all the boxes for me. If I was looking as myself at a camera for photography, that checked so many boxes. And I haven't really had that feeling with other cameras.
I think there's been a branding for a while, a branding problem for Sony, that they have the bad colors. Canon has beautiful colors. Fuji has beautiful colors. Sony has bad colors. And I think they've done a lot of work on that front. And when it comes to photography, that just has not been very true for a long time. The raw images are infinitely flexible. It's kind of up to the photo editing software that you're going to work with to make sure that it's treating them appropriately. And it's rare that it's an issue, I think. Any of the recent Sonys can look fantastic for photography. There's not a problem there. I think on the other hand, when it comes to video, it was a little more justified. Shooting and trying to get S-Log2 to look nice. There was some weird tinting to the skin tones. It would just want to go in the wrong direction, and you would have to work harder to get it back. I have spent less time shooting S-Log3 or 2 on the newest cameras. I know that their color response has been adjusted lately. Sony says that it's better. A lot of people shooting on it say that it's better. And the results that I see from so many of the people that have switched to Sony on YouTube, their footage looks beautiful. It's coming out great. So obviously it's very workable. So I don't think that that idea of Sony being the one with bad colors is all that important with any of the newer cameras. I don't know, Jordan, am I right?
That's exactly where I'm at. I really like working with S-Log3 from the latest batch of cameras. I even like working with S-Cinetone now that I know exactly how it's going to shoot me in the foot while I'm working with it. The thing and this is something Gerald's been going on a tear about, I don't understand their feature implementation strategy. Every new camera that comes out, they'll throw all of their new stuff into it. I love their breathing compensation that they've brought out. I think the A7R5 has the best screen design for video makers of anything on the market right now, but they put that on an A7R5 that's not a great video camera, to be totally honest, and then they bring out an FX30 or a ZV-E1 that doesn't have that brilliant implementation, or they have high-end cameras like the A1, the A7S III, and those cameras aren't getting things like the breathing correction or all of the new features that Sony's putting in, even though we know they've told us it's the same processor, it's the same software, it's the same menu interface. They can do it. That I would find super frustrating. If I bought an A1, I'd be pissed right now. The camera was released previously to the feature being announced. It just doesn't seem to get it in firmware. And Sony was making strides in firmware for a few years when they had buggy cameras that needed work. Now that they're a lot more stable, they're just not getting these feature updates. And I think that's a real shame.
Right. Yeah. And, the whole usability of Sony as well, to me, maybe the best example I can think of is that, when I picked up the ZV-E1, and it was the first Sony I'd used in at least 6 months or something, and I'd kind of forgot what everything is. And I'm looking at the buttons. I'm like, wait a minute, C1, C2, C3, C4, they're all labeled. They have generic labels on them. I'm like, to find out what anything does, I need to just start randomly pressing buttons. And this isn't really an issue with most of the other brands. So this is part of why I think there's like an inherent design philosophy that makes Sony's more challenging, because if I pick up a Panasonic, I had never used one until like pretty recently, and I figured it out really quickly because everything is labeled. The buttons are thicker and press better. Like, there is a way to design things so that anybody can understand it more quickly. There's another way to design them that's a little more challenging. So let's maybe move on to my my kind of new favorite, which Panasonic I've been loving lately. They are probably not in third place. I imagine that's probably Nikon in terms of sales, but still, here we are. I actually just, on my most recent trip, we traveled to Istanbul, Turkey, and I was almost entirely shooting the Panasonic for stills as well. So I finally have some experience with that. But Chris, what was your take on the stills out of recent Panasonics?
So first off, I do want to mention color. We've been talking about that. I actually find Panasonic color to be quite pleasing. I really do. And again, it's another one of those things where I don't think people really talk about it very much. They've always had great sensors. I don't think that's ever been an issue. The Panasonics, the design structure is very easy, absolutely, to learn. My main complaint with them, the autofocus was one thing, and I know everybody's making a really big deal about now the hybrid phase detect autofocus in the S5 II, and I think that's a great way to go. Finally, they did it. I mean, it has to be the sort of story with Panasonic when we looked last year. But at the same time, I don't feel like I have the confidence when I'm using their autofocus still. I almost still prefer to go back to just contrast detect single point, because I know how that works with Panasonic, and I can predict that, and it is very accurate. So I haven't had great success with a hybrid phase detect autofocus. I think that's going to take just a few more cameras and a few more iterations before it really starts to compete with the other brands. But I think it's a step in the right direction. I like the way the bodies feel. I've never really liked their boxy look. Don't tell our Panasonic rep. She hates when I talk about that. But, that's in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, functional cameras, easy to use. And I do think they have good contention as being a powerful hybrid camera as well.
I totally agree with you about the boxy look. I think they could use some work. They only have a little bit more soul than the Sonys, but not that much. And honestly, there's not that many cameras right now that feel like they do have it. And when we get to Fuji, to me, they're the only ones other than like Leicas and Hasselblad, other than premium cameras, they're the only ones that have some of that distinct personality. But we'll come back to that when we do. But first touching on the autofocus, because that was the big revolution recently. So, I know we're talking about Panasonics in general, but right now they're obviously in an era shift. They're about to switch from anything that was anything that was contrast detect only to their new phase detect, and using it quite a bit now. It is mostly reliable. I did have some moments where it would just kind of drift for no good reason and just sit at the wrong place and ruin a shot. That it does still happen. It's not at the same place that Canon or Sony are, but it is very usable. It's not that's, I think if they hadn't done this, they wouldn't keep making cameras right now. Like, they'd be out of the game if they couldn't have fixed this. When they did, it was the time that this had to happen. So I'm really glad that they were able to do it. And I agree that I think that some more software, some more firmware updates will get them to the place where it's probably going to be able to be much more competitive, both with Canon and Sony. And sometimes I don't notice a difference. Sometimes it responds exactly the same way. I do still have problems with my Canon R5, which people consider to be a fantastic autofocus camera, but it's also not perfectly reliable either. You mentioned colors. Agreed that they are very easy to work with. Everything comes out looking really nice. It's Sony sensors in there, so everything's great about the image quality. Just like really no complaints. And then of course a huge advantage to me is that as an underdog, they were able to compete on all these more niche features that are actually pretty important to me. One that I talk about all the time for video is shooting open gate, so you get a taller image out of your sensor. I'm glad that everybody seems to be talking about this now, because with the rise of vertical video, the cameras sensors should all be square. So seeing something that gets closer to that, I really appreciate. And also just adding all especially in the video world, like adding all those little details that Jordan and I know how important they are, like shooting with shutter angle, having proper zebras, having proper waveforms and vector scopes. And the list just goes on and on about like, oh yeah, they knew that all of these things are important to us. What did I miss, Jordan?
The XLR adapter would be one I'd throw out. Being able to load your own LUTs, which Sony's jumping on as well, which I find really useful. It just seems like they're listening to people, and they seem to have kind of dropped the idea of segmentation. When was the last time they released a cinema camera? You know, the EVA-1, like 7 years ago, maybe at this point. So they seem to be going all in as like hybrid cameras are where they're dumping all their video R&D, and it shows. I think you're right. The autofocus on it, I can pretty well predict it now, but I've been using the camera for months. I would still put it behind Sony and Nikon at this point. I'd put it above Canon, because Canon, it still just jumps on the background for no reason, where the Panasonic will at least gradually drift to the background if it gets confused.
Remind all the camera manufacturers, I just want to take a moment to please beg them, have a mode similar to what the Canon cinema cameras do that is face only. When I'm recording A-roll, I never want it to focus on my hand when I'm gesturing. There's never anything in the background it needs to focus on. Stay here the whole time, no matter what. If I leave frame, don't focus on the background. If I, this should be on every single video camera. Should be the default. I know, like, if you're a beauty blogger, you will hold, products up in front of your face. That should be the alternate mode. If you're recording A-roll where you're talking, the default, like the primary way you should work is face only. Don't focus on human body parts. Don't look for birds back there. Just stay on me. Just little tangent there, but everybody needs to do that.
Well, it's funny because on the R6 too, they added that feature to it. And then we were testing it for our video review. And that was the one time while I'm talking about and thankfully now it'll just stay on your face. And the second I say that, it's like, oh, I'm just going to wander off in the background there for a while. So it's still not bulletproof. Honestly, no one's just Sony's is the closest right now.
Yeah. So overall, I'm glad to see Panasonic is making a comeback. Like, I really do think that, the price and what you get for that. The thing is, like, the price is excellent and it's competing with the cameras that are more expensive. I still, in my mind, compare it to the cameras that cost at least $500 more because it is comparable to them and you're saving money. So, I really do think Panasonic is worth considering, especially for that, like, kind of hybrid space where you want to be able to shoot both. They're doing great.
Their lens strategy makes so much sense, too, for video shooters.
The only advice I would give Panasonic now is maybe take a look back, especially when we're talking about addressing their soulless, boxy kind of look and, just not being very sexy cameras. They used to make some really nice compact cameras, and I feel like they could return to that, especially now, with this big change with autofocus and trying to improve things. Make some of those compact cameras that everybody knows and loves from them. I think there's a desire for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Who I think is doing that well is Fuji. So let's talk about them next. The most soulful of the camera designers out there. And to me, I think maybe this is represented in the way that the I'm forgetting my brand names right now. The X100 has just exploded and basically become a viral sensation, I think mostly because of TikTok. And they are just not making new X100Vs anymore because they don't have enough parts to make them and sell them. So it's just been this incredible moment for them. And I think the way they were described that made them so viral is that they look vintage is how many people think of them. To me, that's not the important thing about them. It's much more why I think a lot of us still like a lot of mid-century design. It's that there was an approach to design earlier in the 20th century that focused on a sort of a lasting beauty that, like, it doesn't need to look futuristic. It doesn't need to look like technical. It should just be a nice object. Like, it should, the curves, the choices of bezels and the material choices and like where you put the font placement of the aperture markings on the lens and like all of this matters. And if you are very considerate about those choices, it can outlast the technology inside of the camera. And they are taking some of those similar approaches in everything that they make right now, which even goes into the larger sensors as well. Those don't look as like vintagey to me as as the smaller APS-C options, but still are absolutely beautiful. I love the image colors that come out of it. Obviously, a lot of people are shooting JPEG and loving that. I don't know. Autofocus isn't great. What else, Chris? Where are we with Fuji?
Autofocus, if we're going to talk technical, is one of the big terms, but I think you're onto something with the design. Like whether you love it or hate it, at least they have a distinct design. And you think about film cameras back in the 70s and 80s, which is where people then go to, right? They're trying to mimic that look. Those cameras largely did the same thing. I mean, there wasn't much of a mechanical difference. The film was really the big part of your image quality, lens designs, of course, but it was more about choosing a brand that you coveted. I mean, that's why I got into Nikon FEs and FMs. I just coveted that camera, and I loved using it. I loved holding it. I loved being seen with it. And I think that's still a factor that a lot of companies, Panasonic, Sony, for example, have underappreciated. But on top of that too, I think they did something very interesting. A few years ago, the big talk in the industry was you have to go full frame, you're going to die, right? And everybody's like, oh, Micro Four Thirds is dead. APS-C is going to phase out. And I think Fuji very bravely said, you know what? Let's stick with APS-C. Let's go one better, make some awesome medium format cameras. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on how successful that whole line has been for them. But they stuck with APS-C. They were able to then deliver amazing lenses and lots of them. And I think that was smart, especially now that we look at the new sensors with the X-T5. I think they're doing a great job giving people what they want and not having to go to full frame to do it. And I think that shows with their sales. I mean, you're getting a solid camera that can do many different things, that looks great, and that focuses. Yeah, okay.
The Fuji's really the only camera that I will shoot colors straight out of camera, that I'll do a non-log profile and actually use it, because they're doing some of that interesting tone mapping stuff. They've got a powerhouse for video with the XH2S. I don't know, until Panasonic released the S5 II, Fuji was about to be my new favorite for the compact video cameras. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like the XH2S image is one of my favorite out of any format of camera. Even comparing it to full frame, especially in terms of dynamic range, it keeps up really nicely. And in terms of features, they're another company that is listening to us. We're starting to see, they were the first ones to actually let us do a 48th of a second or 96th of a second shutter speed and things like that we were asking. Still not shutter angle, still not waveforms. We'll see those hopefully in the future. But my big concern with their recent launch is a lot of these cameras, just haven't felt completely finished. I don't know if you had issues with hard crashes on them. We definitely ran into those even with production models, things like the punch-in focus not being as sharp as it was previously. So I kind of want Fujifilm to go back to what they were. They were the company who was known for giving you.
You really like the brand.
They were known for giving you initially flaky products, but then they would firmware update the hell out of them until they were super competitive. They've kind of stepped away from that because the cameras shipped really nicely. I'd like to see them get back into that with them, because they have the base hardware to make absolutely some of the nicest cameras out there. I just don't 100% trust them at this point.
Fortunately, I didn't have any of those big issues. But there is, I guess now that you mention it, there's just some little weirdness. I didn't have existential crashes, but there's a few things that could be worked out. But I also just want to take a moment to appreciate their usability. The physicality of the cameras is my absolute favorite. Where the dials are, what they're labeled. It is so clear what you're getting into as you start to operate it, and I love that about Fuji's.
You know what else I like on that topic, Tyler? I want to add is the XS series of cameras. I really appreciate that they made a series of camera that then kind of depart from that. So if you don't love the manual dial control, which a lot of people do, but if you want an alternative, they're offering that, where they could have just been this is the way you go, this is the style of camera, take it or leave it. And actually I prefer the handling of the XS myself, just because, everybody wants different controls. I like that they're being brave like that.
Yeah, no, I just like the way they're running the company. Everything is interesting right now. And they're also leading the pack in some ways when it comes to video. They're doing that Frame.io integration. It was just them and Red that could do this, upload, shoot straight to the cloud, which is pretty amazing. I haven't worked with it yet, but amazing that it is even possible. So, kudos to Fuji for leading from behind, almost from a position of being a smaller company. They are still showing real strength and leadership. And so I absolutely appreciate that. We got to talk about Nikon too, which I will have the least to say about because I have not used a Nikon since the film days. So, and it's not because I don't like them. I've said this before, but it's mostly that their features overlap so directly with Canon that I just didn't feel compelled to. But obviously you guys have spent time with them. How do you describe Nikon's current position?
It's a strange one. I feel like of all the brands, as much as I appreciate using them, we've used them quite a bit. There's something about the cameras when I pick them up that it doesn't quite spark for me. And I don't know if that's just because we haven't seen a change from the Z6, Z7 in a while. Obviously, we have second versions, but we're not seeing new bodies. The one that really, of course, sparked my interest was the ZF-C. I absolutely hope that of all rumors that are true, a full frame ZF-C now being rumored is going to happen, because that I would definitely get on board with. But I mean, they're functional, they work well. I like that they're starting to make some changes that I've complained about, like things like autofocus box color selection. I feel they handle well. The autofocus has been improving lately. It's still not quite there for me, but I think it's very reliable for most users. And I have no complaints about image quality. I just want to see, I don't know. I don't know what it is about the brand. It just doesn't quite grab me. I still prefer using a Canon body, and I think that Nikon and Canon still seem to have this rivalry where they just compete against each other, and I think Nikon can set their sights a little bit higher. But excellent lenses. I love the new glass. I think they're doing a great job there.
I think there's really going to be a reappraisal of Nikon very shortly, because they brought out so many amazing upgrades to the Z9, which I would almost consider separate from any of the other Nikon bodies there, but it's a pro flagship body most people are never going to get their hands on. Once we start to see things like the improved autofocus, that very fast readout work its way into other Nikon cameras, then people might actually be a lot more excited about the brand again. I remember years ago they brought out the D3, which everybody's like, oh, this is the best DSLR ever made. Very few can use it. Then 6 months later brought out the D700, which was most of the good stuff in a consumer body. And Nikon went, I'm sure you remember, Tyler, where like everyone was like, no, Canon's way in the lead. Canon's the way to go with digital, to like, oh no, Nikon is like right there competitive, in some ways even better. And I think that really rolls through to video as well. Like I would not use a Nikon previously to shoot video. I could, if I owned a Nikon, you could get usable video, but I never choose one until the Z9, and then it has the best autofocus interface. Maybe the hit rate isn't quite as good as Sony, but I like using it a lot more than a Sony. Really good stabilization for video. It's doing things like 8K recording right to card, internal RAW recording, which we didn't even think they could do because Red's in a lawsuit with them right now over that capability. Just things we would not expect from Nikon. So if we do see that in a more consumer-oriented body, I could see people being like, I am buying a Nikon for video. And once they start expanding that user base, then I think it's going to be very similar to what we saw before with the D3, D700 example. Suddenly, it's a really good, legitimate choice that's just as capable as a Canon or a Sony. We just have to wait for cheap cameras with the good stuff.
I did a little survey on Twitter a while ago, just asking what people think of as the professional camera brands, especially normal non-photo enthusiasts, people that don't pay attention to the camera industry. And there's still so many people out there that think of Nikon as like, it's Canon, Nikon. Those are the pro cameras. And it's because people take a long time to shift their mental models. And, I don't think the wider public has realized how dominant Sony's become, how serious they are. So Nikon still is holding on to a lot of like brand value that could help them come back in a way that, I don't know. I hope they do, even though I probably won't switch to using one. Do you think it's worth talking about any other brands here? Like obviously more exist, but who else should we touch on?
OM system.
Yeah.
Did you know I was going to say
Chris
that?
loves his OM.
I know some people do.
Yeah,
That was my first film camera, actually. But.
Well, I never really liked the Olympus brand up until more recently. With the computational photography techniques that they started to use, and I'm still surprised that other companies aren't jumping on that the way that they have. I think they've got something quite unique there, but it's another example of a camera where, as a creator, there's more important things than maybe raw image quality. Although I do like their color. I actually think Olympus have some of the best colors straight out of camera of any brand, personally, and OM system for that matter. But certainly just having a camera that's rugged, that's reliable, that has compact lenses. So for outdoor pursuits, for travel, I think they've got very good strengths there. The fact that you can leave a tripod at home in a lot of cases, that to me are some serious advantages that transcend just technological specs or sensor quality or resolution and that kind of stuff. Video-wise, I use them primarily as video cameras and as hybrid cameras, and the video quality isn't up to snuff with.
I'm on an OM5
no
right now, so you be the judge.
Oh,
yeah. See, that's my point. That proves my point. So, maybe, they do have soft video in a lot of cases, and you have to shoot in very specific ways to get usable video, depending on what your output is. If your output is 1080 or on Instagram, that kind of stuff, I think it's fantastic. And it outweighs the downside with the image quality to have the physical benefits of the system itself. I mean, they are super bulletproof. I love the lens choices, lots of compact options, easy to carry. And when we're fishing, for example, I need a camera that can have one lens, maybe two, cover a whole bunch of stuff, be able to fall riverside and take it. I drove a truck over the EM1 Mark III and it survived, right? I mean, that's pretty crazy. So I do like that for the brand. And I think for videography, if it was hardcore use for video work like Jordan would use, then of course you might not love it.
and of course, we could talk about more upmarket cameras if we have had time. There's, Leica and Hasselblad and Red and Alexa and all that. But, I think we'll kind of contain it to a certain price range for today. But I also want to make sure that we have one moment of kind of summing up, where are we with lenses? Because we've talked a lot about the camera bodies, touched on the lenses, but the lens selection is super important for which camera you're going to actually choose. I'll just go first that I think it's frustrated me that both Sony and Canon have gone so expensive for their professional lenses. It's becoming difficult to own more than one for normal people. I mean, they went up by $1,000 for just kind of their, if you want to get that sort of trinity of ultra wide, normal and telephoto zooms, you're spending thousands more to get all three of them. And the quality has gone up as well. They are much better, but they're also bigger. So it's not, I don't know, we're in a little bit of a weird place for them specifically. Sony definitely wins in terms of variety. There's a million of them to choose from, and they do have some more affordable ones. So I really appreciate that. Panasonic has, I love what Panasonic did with their, all being basically the same size. They don't breathe, so they don't need software to fix the breathing internally. They are sharp enough. They're 1.8, which is pretty darn fast instead of, I'd prefer them. I like that they're all the same speed instead of some are 1.4 and some are 2.0. Everything is just the same. That took, some design courage. They had to commit to a concept and follow it all the way through. Now they just need a bit more variety as well. I think, that L alliance of lenses is really interesting and could be great, but there needs to be a little bit more selection. Fuji, I'm actually not loving the Fuji lenses. The more I've tried them, the more of them that I'm they're too inconsistent. I never know what I'm going to get. And I don't know. Those are the ones I've used lately. Was I right or wrong?
I mean, the one thing I'd say about Sony would be the 20 to 70 is a good exception to what you're saying. Because absolutely, the new lenses are expensive, but the 20 to 70 is unique. F4 is fine for a lot of people. I loved it. I love that 20 to 70. Yeah, I've actually been using the Panasonic 20 to 60 a lot, which is a little worse because it's 3.5 to 5.6, but that's 20 is so useful. Oh, yeah. So I love that Sony did that. Especially with Sony relying a lot on cropping for a lot of their functions, I think then that helps to mitigate that issue. But yeah, it's sharp, it's decent, and any downsides it has are being intelligently corrected by the camera afterwards, right? So it's a good example of, I think, where we're going to start to see lens design really start to push towards.
Well, I think you brought up something interesting there, Tyler, where you're talking about Canon and Sony really bringing up the prices of the lens. But with Sony, you've got endless third-party options. You know, same as you brought up, like the Sigma L mount. If you want sharper lenses, those Sigmas are insanely sharp. They're just not as well optimized for video. You've got choice there. It's Canon who, you know, it's been harped on endlessly. They're putting themselves in a really tough place, especially now that Nikon seems to be opening up the Z mount to third-party development. So they're the last country. I did it again. Last
all these
company,
Countries.
I know.
Do you want to have a debate about the global socioeconomic?
I'm just going to do Japan versus Germany, I guess, because those are the only countries making cameras. But I think that's a really huge thing. I mean, some of our favorite lens of the year was a Tamron very recently. I think they got to open that up. So hopefully we start seeing things that way. As well, I just want to say ultra wide to normal zooms are the future. I'm getting shot on a 10-25 Panasonic right now. It's better. OM System brought out an 8-25, which is a 16-50 zoom lens. That's awesome. So I hope we see a lot more of that stuff going forward.
Cool. Okay. Now, how about let's just do a lightning round, like the thought association with, you know, when I say a camera brand, what do you think about it? So let's start with Canon. Like what's the quickest way you'd summarize where Canon is right now?
Great intuitive handling.
Annoying.
Okay, Sony.
Technological leaders.
Cutting edge.
Panasonic.
Video.
First, Jordan.
Hey,
video.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with that. How about Fuji?
Great design needs improvement.
Listening.
And how about Nikon?
We need trickle down. We need technology to trickle down. They need to.
Nikon is we'll see. That's what I would say. All the potential's there. They just have to put it in cheap cameras.
Cool. Well, I mean, I think we covered a lot there. I think everybody now knows exactly which brand is right for them, and it's going to be easy to go out and buy their next camera. So
we did it.
Thanks, guys, for solving all these problems. I mean, you know, now that there's no DP review around, I guess that 20-minute discussion will have to be as deep as anybody will get anymore. Or, of course, they could subscribe to the Petapixel YouTube channel, where they can find Jordan and Chris carrying on with their antics. And, guys, it's great to see you again, and can't wait to watch the new videos.